Let me ask you a question. Do you see Marvel's TV output as a success? And not whether or not isolated projects have been able to stand out among the flood of other superhero shows? Personally, I know some have. But as a whole, including that one show everyone wants to forget about, has Marvel managed to tap into the TV market and expand their entertainment empire further than it already was? And I'm not talking about Daredevil or even Jessica Jones's Netflix days, though I may circle back around to those in just a second. And no, I'm not talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. either, though I know some of you ride or die Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would end me if I said a single negative word about it. I'm talking about Disney Plus Marvel, the output of late that some have stressed is worse than ever. But is it? Today, I want to find out what works, what doesn't, and most importantly, the 4 reasons as to why. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm that sandwich guy, your nihilistic optimist, and Marvel's track record with TV, to say the least, has had its ups and downs. From some of the best production designs ever, to some of the least compelling storytelling put to screen. But to fully understand how we got here, we gotta take a step back and look at who put us there. Beginning way back in June of 2010, Marvel launched a division of their production team that would still work closely with everyone else, but would focus their output solely on television. And in this, multiple big names were involved, but none more so than Jeff Loeb. And yes, this is the same guy you're probably thinking of, known for The Long Halloween and so many others, who served as executive producer for every adjacent but distinctly not MCU show on ABC, Hulu, Freeform, and Netflix. And I'm getting ahead of myself just a bit, but that Netflix stuff, at least the early ones like Daredevil and the first season of Jessica Jones, is genuinely great, receiving critical acclaim and positive word of mouth that spread like wildfire, beginning with incredible filmmaking and storytelling that wasn't hindered by the budget, but instead fostered creativity in a gritty and grounded setting. However, as time went on, it became clear to the producers how much of a profit could be made, so they decided slashing that budget whenever they could to ensure they'd get their bonuses was the best way to go. After all, if they could penny and dime those productions at every turn, those bonuses would increase at every turn. Foolproof plan, right? Well, no, because as we all remember, those shows fell off hard, and what was the biggest deal in TV history at the time is barely ever thought of. Which sucks, because if not for Marvel guaranteeing that these characters would live on in the MCU in Born Again or some way or another, I would love to still be getting quality Marvel Netflix shows. By now, we could have had enough seasons of Iron Fist that they might have been able to turn him around and make him less of a whiny brat, like what we saw when he appeared in the 2nd season of Luke Cage for an episode. Hell, we could have had a Heroes for Hire show by now, something that could still happen, but seems less likely in the MCU. Because the potential of these shows will always be in the shadow of its producers constantly wanting to spend less on them, where the creatives had to fight tooth and nail for every small bit of production or choreography. In fact, Steven S. DeKnight, Daredevil's director and showrunner, at least for the first season, recently opened up about how the show could have had more acrobatics and swinging around, yet it simply wasn't in the cards when producers would never allow them to spend the amount of money it would take to make something like that look good. And greedy studio heads aren't new for Hollywood. In reality, they've always just been a part of this process, but they need to be brought up because when discussing Marvel, especially their TV division, it's impossible to escape the looming presence of one narrow-minded man. Ike Perlmutter, a run-of-the-mill greedy Hollywood producer who, as you'll soon find out, doesn't have a great understanding of what actually makes all of these superheroes popular. That, of course, being a healthy mixture of escapism and relatability. And all I really have to say to illustrate how much this guy doesn't know what he's doing is to say that he spearheaded that terrible Inhumans show. But overall, it's thanks to his dominance over Marvel's early days, which can can only be described as tyrannical that phases 1 and 2 almost tripped over themselves. Because for the longest time, Perlmutter held the same amount of sway as Kevin Feige, vetoing countless superhero projects for reasons that were totally not because of prejudice. In fact, a big reason why we only got a Black Widow movie until after she was already dead was because of Perlmutter's belief that a movie starring a woman wasn't going to be profitable. And putting aside the box office for Black Widow, because that has more to do with the chaotic time it came out, Perlmutter has happened to say the same thing about Black Panther. You know, the movie that made $1 billion? That or the Captain Marvel movie, which the worst of internet grifters still like to rag on, but also made $1 billion. Yet, that's for movies, which arguably have more influence over public opinion. Yet when it comes to television, the actual topic of this video, Perlmutter had a surprisingly larger impact. Not showrunning, but shaping a lot of those early Marvel shows. And I like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter, but they are both still indicative of what was happening behind the scenes. Because for as fun as they are, and for all of those moments where they are genuinely great, it can't be ignored how self-contained and thus inconsequential it was, which shouldn't matter, but does when that's how they advertised the show.
The epic adventure that began in Thor: The Dark World continues in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
And Perlmutter had that level of control in the first place because Feige basically sacrificed Marvel's TV division, giving it completely to Perlmutter, all for the sake of more creative freedom when it came to their movie output, which was worth it for the clear, focused shift on the silver screen, but ended up hurting public opinion of Marvel's TV outings, a subconscious image that has lasted long after they reshaped their TV projects. Still, the Disney Plus era of the MCU technically started in 2021 with WandaVision, marking the beginning of Phase 4 and their post-Endgame output. Of course, Disney Plus itself launched a couple years prior in 2019, and we'd already gotten plenty of promises from Feige in that time, claiming how each and every MCU show in the making would not only be movie quality, but would also be important to their ongoing interconnected story. And it's in the next few years, from around 2019 to 2023, where things really started to shake up. I'm sure with the hope that Marvel would be able to live up to those promises, but it was in this period that everyone in Marvel really put in effort to push out Perlmutter, with him steadily losing control in that time until March of 2023 when he was officially fired as part of Bob Iger's company-wide restructuring, which we always suspected, but now know was to gut the company to sell for the highest price. But taking the wins where we can, it was undeniably nice to see Perlmutter go. Hope the door didn't smack him on the way out. Yet I fully expected a dramatic shift the moment he was gone, and that's exactly what we were assured. However, that right there is a big reason why this whole arrangement hasn't been very successful in the public's eye, which all brings me to the current era of that TV division, Disney Plus, and the 4 reasons why it hasn't quite succeeded. But my 2 cents on each and every one of these, which is around what you paid for, is that the majority of them fall on the positive side. And I know I'm gonna lose a lot of you here, but I do mean all of them. Not you though. Yet, they failed at what they set out to do, that being an organic fleshing out of the world in between the lines of what we usually see from the MCU. And I asked in the thumbnail whether it was Disney Plus's fault, mainly just because I assumed that would clickbait the most people, but obviously, it's not an entire platform's fault. It's the sometimes greedy, sometimes plain old incompetent leaders. Because when these shows are good, that's only the case when the creative minds in charge of said show are actually allowed to be in charge, where stylistic choices such as Ms. Marvel's 2D animation over top and snappy editing, or Daredevil's fisheye lens, are made for all the right reasons, but are dropped after only a couple instances of them being used, which is due to a lack of central control on these isolated projects. Because if you didn't already know, barely any of these shows had showrunners. And that right there is the first of the 4 reasons. Because Feige assumed he'd have enough time to work on all of these shows alongside the movies that would also need his attention. And it's not like he's the only mind crafting these stories. He's just the bigwig producer. But he himself decided that every bit of continuity and interconnectivity would be upheld by his diligence, ensuring he'd keep a watchful eye on everything and make sure each intertwining story flowed correctly. Yet in doing so, he didn't allow any of those writers to talk to one another to formulate some kind of overarching strategy and synergy, with Feige putting that responsibility squarely on his own shoulders. And it's funny, because for those early examples, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision, there were head writers who could have easily taken on the role of showrunner, and basically were, that being Malcolm Spellman and Jack Schaefer respectively. Yet neither were given that level of creative control for the sake of it all being a part of Feige's baby. And as an adamant MCU shill who defends every one of their decisions, I can see a world where that makes sense to keep secrets from getting out, but honestly, even in that ridiculously tight-lipped world, there is no reason why Feige couldn't have just hired someone he trusted to help shoulder that burden, because one man attempting to showrun everything will simply never work. In fact, for the rare cases that Feige stepped down and allowed a showrunner, with Jack Schaefer wholly leading Agatha all along, creativity was allowed to flourish throughout, and not just a little bit in the first act of the show's season-long arc, where it doesn't matter as much that they follow a particular formula. Nonetheless, all I truly want is for the creative minds behind these shows to be allowed a standard of creative freedom and to input their life experiences into the storytelling to elevate it. You know, what a showrunner does. Yet that alone can't fix Disney's ongoing issue with MCU shows. Because, moving on to the second reason they failed in the public's eye, how these shows either needed to build to some interconnected climax, or just needed to be fun sitcoms. Preferably the first, because that's what the MCU was predicated on, but the second is significantly easier, because the muddled mess of characters being introduced and promptly forgotten about, or reintroduced multiple times, is at best confusing, which is an ongoing flaw with the MCU, especially in their post-credit scenes. But just to give you one example of this happening across Marvel's Disney Plus shows would be their disorganized and disorienting usage of Kingpin. Seriously, why would you reintroduce Kingpin in Hawkeye, getting fans all hyped, just to get rid of him with a bullet to the brain? Then, to make matters worse, that very unbelievable but evidently significant fatal wound barely has any impact on Kingpin's next appearance in Echo, and is all but forgotten about by Born Again, the synergy of which from show to show was meant to be made succinct by Feige, but I guess he was taking a nap the day that this was all planned out. But for what it's worth, after Endgame, I really thought the MCU still had it in them to give us something special. I've made videos commenting on this in the past, but I'm sure Marvel's new slate of movies and TV shows for Phase 4 was first conceived and announced with next-level integration and storytelling in mind, seamlessly weaving their storylines together. Because like I mentioned before, that's what the MCU initially was, kicking off Phase 1 with the idea that each of these isolated superheroes being introduced would inevitably team up, which made it all the more rewarding to see each and every one of them. And phases or not, because the MCU's whole phase thing has never felt more superfluous, all of these new characters for phases 4 and 5 needed to be introduced with an ongoing narrative involving them in mind. I personally like isolated projects that are just fun, and I'll get more into that in just a sec, but that's not what the fans want from them. So why not bring the Midnight Suns or the Young Avengers together for a fun adventure? I'm hoping they'll at least still appear in the next couple Avengers movies, but more than 3 years ago, when I first assumed they were setting up those inevitable teams, I read a bunch of their stories and ended up loving them. I don't know, I just want to see these guys interact at least once. Makes Age of Ultron's party scene seem like the good old days. Honestly, and hold on to your butts, this might have been a little too crazy of an idea, but teasing Skrulls across all of these shows, the whole time hinting at them more and more, with fans theorizing that one side character is definitely a Skrull because he's acting all weird, and then after a cliffhanger season finale where it's revealed that an evil group of Skrulls had been infiltrating, bam, a secret invasion TV show crossover event is announced. Actually, you know what? Shadow dropped as they announce it. If this is my perfect world, I can make the rules. And something like that wouldn't even have to tie in with any movie, because A, said invasion could potentially be a stealth operation, and B, the heroes involved wouldn't turn to the big names when they don't know who to trust. All of which feeds into a better drama that rewards those who watched everything and noticed every clue. And a lot of the specific complaints against the Disney Plus MCU stuff are that they don't reward you for watching it, often leaving you with a cliffhanger that may or may not pay off in 3 to 5 years. However, even if integrated well, that becomes a double-edged sword where it can feel like homework to stay up to date. And I don't necessarily agree with that view, because when done at its best, conjoined stories can build off of one another while still just being fun cameos that don't require prerequisite watches to understand. And I know that can work because people aren't turned off by seeing a character pop up in a movie after being introduced in a TV show. Feige loves to point his finger at that perceived notion for causing Thunderbolts' underperforming box office, but I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous. As a matter of fact, I've never sworn on this channel. Not that I don't, it's just never felt right in a scripted format like this. But you know what? Thunderbolts not making a profit because it has 2 characters in it that were introduced 4 years prior in Falcon and the Winter Soldier is bullshit. The average audience member simply assumes they're a new person and is rightfully acquainted with them as the movie goes on, as they will with every character. Yet Quantum Mania made more money than the Thunderbolts, so what does the audience and box office know? Anyway, as a dumb member of said audience, in lieu of all this, I suggest that all of these TV shows shed their baggage and be fun standalone projects. And what works most of all in this plan is that, like storytelling at its finest, making something in the first place should come down to a creative mind having a great idea and wanting to tell a particular narrative without any constraints. There's nothing wrong with expanding out the MCU by placing a sitcom in there. In that way, She-Hulk is kind of the perfect Marvel show. It fleshes out the day-to-day world of the MCU with a fun court case and an ancillary B-plot every episode, and gives us time with an ensemble cast that is greeted by a surprise MCU guest star most of the time. And I know She-Hulk didn't fare particularly well thanks to a myriad of other causes, but telling more day-to-day stories like it, rather than the all-out spectacle all the time, could have gone a long way. Of course, when you talk about an MCU show, you might think about a big event that costs just as much as a movie, yet what you should really be thinking about are fun and creative opportunities to organically expand the universe. But I guess Feige wanted to keep his TV shows as big as his movies, which brings me to the third reason that Marvel's TV shows have seemingly failed. The fact that all of these high-budget miniseries should have been movies. If I'm honest, this list may sound like a lot, but compared to everything, it barely scratches the tip of the iceberg, because the only MCU Disney Plus shows that justify being a television show, with genuine care and effort clearly put in to create something that needed to be told the way it was, are She-Hulk, WandaVision, Loki, and Agatha all along. Plus your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and Eyes of Wakanda if you're counting the animated stuff, which I always do. The argument could be made that even Loki could have been more popular as a movie, but thanks to it being what it was, I'm willing to give it a pass. Plus, WandaVision changed every episode and highlighted how fun it is to speculate week to week with other fans. I mean, sometimes those fans get a little overzealous with those predictions, but that's on them more than the show themselves, unless someone specifically says otherwise. Yet that's a topic for another day. But stay with me here, future Marvel shows need to be more Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and less 6-episode events that are 6-hour movies. Because they're not movies, and the second TV shows are considered long-form movies without masterful execution and careful consideration, their pacing goes out the window. Hence why Game of Thrones ended so poorly. Sorry to call out such a topical reference, but it needed to be said, because serialized storytelling needs time to organically develop and even more time to organically wrap up. Because after 6 or so hours of setup, no singular climax can satisfy that when those climaxes are paced exactly like a movie's third act. With these MCU shows, we needed a full 20+ episodes per season, just for more time to naturally get to know the characters and their culture. Moon Knight takes us all the way to Egypt, and Ms. Marvel literally went back in time to illustrate Kamala's heritage, but I needed so much more time to get to know them. So, instead of attempting to find ways to draw out these movie-esque narratives into long-form miniseries, and attaching a price tag to them that is somehow more than their average blockbuster, distill those stories down to the essence of what purely works, and just do that. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, Echo, Born Again, Ironheart, and of course, counting the animated stuff, Marvel Zombies, all should have been built from the ground up to be a theatrical event. I know that's counterintuitive to me wanting to spend more time with these characters, but having a movie to their name could have potentially made them an icon in the public's eye. And if the elevator pitch for a new superhero project doesn't immediately explain why it's structured as a television show, then don't force it to be. Because I can't help but feel that all of these Disney Plus shows could have been either, and were only chosen to be miniseries because Feige and Marvel's other producers simply wanted to dip their fingers into the TV market. And it's a shame, because I'm sure at some point, each and every one of these shows was on track to be something great. I mean, obviously, no one sets out to make something bad, yet even Secret Invasion, Marvel's undeniable worst by a metric mile, before its $100 million reshoots, looked promising. After the fact, having done some research, I can now see that Secret Invasion's head writer, Kyle Bradstreet, wasn't as experienced as I thought, but years ago, I remember hearing that name was attached and thinking, we're getting a Secret Invasion show from one of the guys who wrote on Mr. Robot? Hell yeah. Only for that excitement to dwindle more and more as I learned one disappointing fact after another. And it's nice to think about what could have been, but thanks to what we got, we look at all of these characters with the lowest common denominator in mind, that being their iffy finales. Falcon and the Winter Soldier suffers from this flaw the most, yet all I really wanted from it was for people to argue about propaganda and beat the crap out of each other, and that's exactly what I got. Hawkeye could have been more My Life as a Weapon, yet it gave me this awesome and original trick arrow and a great emotional moment just 10 minutes later. Moon Knight needed more ambiguity, where the audience should have been questioning whether Khonshu was even real, or needed Khonshu to be straight up evil, yet I still had fun with its bombastic storyline and emotional core about brotherhood and self-love. Ms. Marvel, as mentioned, failed to make the most of its uniqueness, yet was a fun ride with a fun, memorable protagonist. And Echo and Born Again I have significant problems with, but I'll leave my reviews linked to explain that further. Yet for the most part, I enjoyed both. To be clear, one much more than the other, but all of them have a sour taste in my mouth thanks to how they were poorly wrapped up and left hanging. But speaking of left hanging, that brings us to the fourth and final reason as to why the MCU's TV shows haven't flourished like we all want them to, that being their lack of special presentations. A phenomenal idea that stands out among other long-form shows, harkens back to their one-shot days, and went 2 for 2, yet has not been capitalized on. We're getting a Punisher one, and I can't wait to see that, but in my perfect world, we'd be getting a new half-hour special presentation every month. It's the same philosophy as having more sitcoms in the MCU. Why not make tons of isolated and unnecessary adventures that bring people in not with interconnectivity, but just fun and compelling storytelling? Hell, I'll take one with just dialogue. I just want to spend time with these characters, and I know I'm not alone in that sentiment. Or use that medium to introduce new wacky ideas thrown out into the world to see what sticks. Not everything has to come back, but if people like a particular character, it can. I don't know, give Howard the Duck some kind of recurring special presentation. Either way, this unique format is something that needs to be talked about more, and frankly, it's sad that it's not. Would having more special presentations fix that? Not inherently, because they also need to be good, but having more than the 2 we have, with only one other on the way, would undoubtedly make this format something, rather than the afterthought it currently is. Would any of these fixes have helped the MCU's venture into television? I like to think so, but that's just wishful thinking, because all we can really do now is sit back and hope for the best. Crossing my fingers Born Again Season 2 brings it around for me. Yet either way, I am so excited for Wonder Man and Vision Quest. Who knows, along with just being fun, maybe they're interconnected as well. I would love to see some kind of comic nod, but just straight up having entertaining stuff to watch is a plus. Also, if you're asking yourself, what about What If? Don't worry, I didn't forget it. It's just that What If is a beast unto itself, and I've already got a couple videos made to remedy the headache caused by its declining 3 seasons. But as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.